I was folding laundry when my phone pinged with Sarah's voice message. Pressing play, I expected her usual check-in. Instead, I heard her laughing with her husband, Mark. Mom's getting so pathetic. She actually believes we're saving for Emily's college when we're booking that Europe cruise. The old fool keeps sending money every month. Just keep playing along until we can get her to sell the house and move into that cheap senior home. Then we'll have everything. My hands trembled as I replayed those words. The lavender-scented fabric softener on Frank's old flannel shirt suddenly made me nauseous. I set down the laundry basket and sank onto my bed, my mind reeling from what I'd just heard. My daughter, my only child, the little girl I'd raised with such love and devotion, thought I was a pathetic old fool. I'm Lorena, 68 years old, and until 5 minutes ago, I thought I had a wonderful relationship with my daughter. Frank and I had been married for 42 years when his heart gave out on a Tuesday morning while he was reading the newspaper. One moment he was chuckling about the comics, the next, he was gone. That was 5 years ago, and Sarah had been my rock through it all. Or so I thought. Our house in Naperville, Illinois wasn't fancy, but Frank and I had paid it off 10 years before he died. We'd been smart with money, both of us teachers who understood the value of saving. Frank taught high school mathematics while I spent 35 years teaching 3rd grade at Meadowbrook Elementary. We'd lived modestly, driven our cars until they fell apart, and saved every penny we could for retirement and for Sarah's future. Sarah had been our miracle baby born after 7 years of trying and 2 miscarriages. Maybe that's why I never could say no to her. When she struggled in college, we paid for tutors. When she wanted to switch majors 3 times, we supported her. When she married Mark, fresh out of university, we paid for the wedding, even though something about him never sat right with Frank. He's got shifty eyes, Frank had said the night before the wedding. Never looks you straight on when he's talking about money. I'd laughed it off then. Frank was just being protective of his little girl. But now, sitting on the edge of the bed we'd shared for so many decades, I wondered if he'd seen something I'd missed. After Frank died, Sarah and Mark had been so attentive. They lived just 20 minutes away in Wheaton, and Sarah would drop by several times a week with Emily, my granddaughter. Emily was 8 now, a bright-eyed little girl with Frank's smile and Sarah's stubborn streak. She was the light of my life, and I'd gladly do anything for her. Which is exactly what I'd been doing. Every month for the past 6 years, I'd written a check for $1,000. Sarah had come to me when Emily was 2, tears in her eyes, worried about the cost of raising a child and saving for college. "The education system is so expensive now, Mom," she'd said, holding my hand across my kitchen table. "Mark and I calculated that if we start saving now with compound interest, we'll have enough for Emily to go to any school she wants without loans." How proud I'd been of their foresight, their responsibility. I'd immediately offered to help. After all, what else did I have to spend money on? Frank's pension and my retirement gave me more than enough to live comfortably. The house was paid for. My car was only 3 years old and my needs were simple. The checks had gone out like clockwork. $72,000 over 6 years. I'd never questioned it, never asked to see the account statements. Why would I? This was my daughter, my flesh and blood. Last month, Sarah had come to me with new worries. Mark had lost his job at the pharmaceutical company, she'd said. The economy was tough, and they were struggling to make ends meet while he looked for work. She'd cried in my arms, and I'd stroked her hair just like when she was little. "We might have to take Emily out of private school," she'd sobbed. "And the mortgage. Mom, I'm so scared." I'd offered to help immediately. Even suggested I might take out a reverse mortgage on the house if things got really bad. Sarah had hugged me so tight, told me I was the best mother in the world. The best mother in the world, a pathetic old fool. I stood up slowly, my knees protesting, walked to the window and looked out at my garden. Frank and I had planted those roses together our first spring in this house. The Japanese maple was Sarah's tree planted the day we brought her home from the hospital. Every inch of this property held memories, and my daughter was scheming to take it away from me. But it wasn't just about the money or the house. It was the calculated cruelty of it all. The way she'd manipulated my love for Emily used my granddaughter as a weapon against me. The fake tears, the manufactured crisis, the praise and gratitude that was nothing but performance. I picked up my phone and played the message again. Had to be sure I wasn't dreaming this nightmare. But no, there it was. Sarah's voice, bright with malicious glee, planning my disposal like I was an old appliance they needed to replace. Just keep playing along until we can get her to sell the house and move into that cheap senior home. Prairie View Senior Home. She'd mentioned it last week so casually. I drove past it the other day, Mom. Looks like such a nice place. All those happy seniors playing cards and making friends. You must get lonely here all by yourself. I hadn't thought much of it then. Now I understood. They weren't just planning to steal my money. They wanted to warehouse me somewhere cheap while they enjoyed the fruits of a lifetime's worth of my and Frank's hard work. The voice message had come through at 2:43 in the afternoon. Sarah usually texted around 3 to check in. Like clockwork, my phone buzzed at 3:05. Hi, Mom, just wanting to see how your day is going. Emily has a piano recital next week. We'd love you to come. When he teats. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Every instinct screamed at me to confront her, to rage and cry and demand answers. But something held me back. Maybe it was Frank's voice in my head, calm and measured like when he dealt with difficult students. When someone shows you who they are, he used to say, believe them the first time, but be smart about how you respond. I typed back, sounds wonderful, sweetheart, wouldn't miss it for the world. Then I scrolled through our recent conversations. There was a pattern I hadn't noticed before. Every text, every call, every visit had been carefully orchestrated to plant seeds. Comments about my forgetfulness when I'd never forgotten anything. Concerns about me driving when I'd never had so much as a fender bender. Suggestions about downsizing, about the burden of maintaining a house, about the benefits of senior living. How long had they been planning this? Weeks, months, years. I thought about Mark's brother James, the lawyer Sarah always bragged about. He specializes in elder law, she'd mentioned more than once. So helpful for families trying to navigate those difficult transitions. Difficult transitions. Is that what they called it when you stripped away an old woman's dignity and independence? My phone rang. Sarah's smiling face appeared on the screen, a photo from last Christmas when we'd all pretended to be a happy family. I let it go to voicemail. Mom, I just realized I sent you a voice message earlier by mistake. Just ignore it, okay? It was meant for Mark. Love you. I almost laughed at the transparency of it. Did she think I was already so far gone that I wouldn't remember listening to her message? Or was this part of the game too, a test, to see if I'd confront her? Well, my dear daughter was about to learn that her mother wasn't quite as pathetic or foolish as she thought. But I needed to be careful. Needed to be smart. If they were already this far along in their plan, I couldn't afford to show my hand too early. I walked back to the laundry, picked up Frank's shirt, and held it close. I'm going to need your help with this one, my love, I whispered. Our little girl has lost her way, and I need to find out just how far she's willing to go. As I folded the rest of the clothes, my mind was already working. Tomorrow I'd start my own investigation. Sarah thought she was dealing with a pathetic old fool. She was about to discover that this old teacher still had a few lessons to teach. The next morning arrived with a brilliant September sunrise that seemed to mock the darkness I'd discovered in my own family. I made my coffee 2 sugars and a splash of cream just like always, but the familiar routine felt different now. Every action was deliberate, calculated. I had become an actress in my own life, and the performance had to be flawless. At 8:30 sharp, I drove to First National Bank on Washington Street. Martha Henderson had been our banker for 20 years, and she greeted me with her usual warm smile. Lorena, how wonderful to see you. How's that beautiful granddaughter of yours? Growing like a weed, I replied, returning her smile while my heart ached. Martha, I need to look at my account history. I'm thinking of meeting with a financial planner, want to make sure all my ducks are in a row. It took her just minutes to print out 6 years of statements. I sat in her office accepting her offer of tea and tried to keep my hands steady as I reviewed the numbers. 72 checks each for exactly $1,000, all cashed within days of receipt. But that wasn't the shocking part. "Martha," I asked quietly, "can you check if there have been any inquiries about my accounts, credit checks, that sort of thing?" Her fingers flew across the keyboard. The frown that creased her face told me everything I needed to know. "That's odd. There have been 3 inquiries in the past 2 months, all from Prairie View Senior Living. Did you authorize those?" "Must have slipped my mind," I lied smoothly. "You know how it is at my age." But Martha wasn't buying it. She'd known me too long. "Lorena, is everything all right? These inquiries, they're checking to see if you have sufficient assets for their entrance fees. Their financial requirements are quite substantial." "Everything's fine, dear. Just exploring options." I left the bank with copies of everything and a cold certainty that this went deeper than I'd imagined. My next stop was the library, where I used their computer to research Prairie View. What I found made my blood run cold. 3 lawsuits in 5 years for elder abuse, unexplained deaths, families complaining about missing assets, and forged signatures. By noon, I was sitting across from Patricia Reeves in a small office above the Starbucks on Main Street. She'd been recommended by Dolores from my church, whose nephew had used her services during a nasty divorce. Patricia was nothing like the private investigators in movies. She was in her 50s, wore sensible shoes, and a cardigan that had seen better days. But her eyes were sharp as a hawk's. "Tell me everything," she said simply. So I did. Showed her the bank statements, told her about the voice message, the Prairie View inquiries. She took notes in neat handwriting, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "This type of financial elder abuse is more common than you'd think," she said when I finished. "The fact that it's family makes it both easier to perpetrate and harder to prosecute. But you're smart to investigate before confronting them. How much do you want to know?" "Everything," I said firmly. "I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with." Patricia's investigation took 2 weeks, and what she uncovered was a masterpiece of deception. She had photographs, documents, recordings. The Tuesday after I hired her, we met in her office to review everything. "Your son-in-law never lost his job." She began sliding a photograph across the desk. It showed Mark in a suit shaking hands with someone under a banner reading, "Congratulations to our new regional sales manager." The date stamp was 3 months ago. "The BMW?" I asked, remembering Sarah's complaints about their aging Honda. "Purchased 2 months ago. They keep it at Mark's mother's house in Schaumburg." Another photo, this one of Sarah climbing into a pristine white BMW. The license plate is registered to Mark's mother, but Sarah's been seen driving it exclusively. The hits kept coming. The vacation rental property in Wisconsin purchased last year. Emily attending not the expensive private school Sarah claimed, but the public elementary school 5 blocks from their house. The same school that had an excellent rating and cost nothing. This is the one that concerned me most. Patricia said, her voice gentle as she handed me another document. Mark's aunt, Gloria Stevenson. She passed away last year at Prairie View. I read through the police report, the complaint filed by Gloria's son, who lived in California. His mother had been in perfect health, living independently until she'd had a fall. Mark had swooped in, convinced her to give him power of attorney, and moved her into Prairie View. Within 6 months, she was dead, her condo sold, and the proceeds mysteriously vanished. The case was dropped due to insufficient evidence, Patricia explained. But I spoke with the detective who worked it. He said everything pointed to Mark and his brother James, but they'd covered their tracks too well. James, the elder law attorney. I said, the pieces clicking into place. Who coincidentally has handled several similar cases, all involving Prairie View, all with the same pattern. Patricia leaned forward. Mrs. Morrison, your daughter and son-in-law aren't just planning to steal from you. They're part of something bigger. I thought I'd been prepared for betrayal. I wasn't prepared for this. My Sarah, my baby girl, was part of a criminal enterprise that preyed on the elderly. How many others had there been? How many lonely old people had been warehoused and robbed? There's more, Patricia said gently. I had my associate follow them for a week. These are from yesterday. The photographs showed Sarah and Mark at an upscale restaurant, champagne glasses raised in a toast. The next showed them at a Mercedes dealership. The final one nearly broke me, Sarah trying on designer dresses, while Mark sat in a chair, both of them laughing. The metadata shows this was taken 2 hours after she called you, claiming they couldn't afford Emily's school supplies, Patricia noted. I stared at my daughter's laughing face in the photograph. When had she become this person? Where was the little girl who used to crawl into my lap with skinned knees, trusting me to make everything better? What do you recommend? I asked. Document everything. Record your conversations if possible. Illinois is a 2-party consent state, but there are ways around that if you're careful. Most importantly, protect your assets immediately. Do you have an attorney? Frank's cousin's daughter, Catherine Walsh. She's helped me with a few things since Frank passed. Call her today. Set up a trust change your will, make it ironclad. And Mrs. Morrison. Patricia's expression was serious. Be very careful. People who do this kind of thing, they don't like their plans being disrupted. I left Patricia's office with a flash drive full of evidence and a heart full of determination. Sarah thought she was playing chess with a confused old woman. She had no idea that this old woman had just become the queen on the board, and I could move in any direction I chose. That evening, Sarah called for our usual Tuesday chat. I'd prepared for this, even practiced in the mirror. Hi, sweetie, I answered, injecting a note of confusion into my voice. Is it Tuesday already? The days just seem to run together anymore. Yes, Mom, it's Tuesday, Sarah said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. Are you taking your medications? Of course, dear. Although I did have trouble remembering if I'd taken them this morning. Ended up taking an extra just to be safe. A pause. Mom, you can't do that. That's dangerous. Maybe we should look into one of those pill organizers. Or, another pause calculated. Maybe it's time to think about having some help. Oh, I'm fine, I protested weakly. Just a little forgetful. Speaking of which, did I tell you I've been thinking about updating my will? That nice man from the senior center mentioned it last week. What man? Sarah's voice sharpened. Oh, what's his name? Tall fellow. Said everyone should review their estate planning regularly. I let my voice drift. Or was that on television? I can't quite remember. Mom, you shouldn't be talking to strangers about your finances. That's something family should handle. Why don't I set up a meeting with James? He could make sure everything is properly arranged. That would be nice, dear, I said vaguely. You're so good to me. Oh, someone's at the door. Probably those missionaries again. I'll talk to you later. I hung up before she could protest, then immediately called Catherine Walsh. Within an hour, we had an appointment for the next morning. The game was afoot, and I intended to win. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stood in Emily's room looking at all the toys and books I'd bought over the years. The dollhouse Frank had spent weeks building, the bookshelf filled with all the stories I'd read to her. What would happen to Emily when her parents' scheme fell apart? How would I protect her from the fallout? But I knew one thing for certain: I wouldn't let them succeed. Not with me and not with anyone else. Sarah had accidentally sent me that voice message for a reason. Call it divine intervention or cosmic justice. But I'd been given the chance to stop them. And I would, no matter what it cost me. The October air had turned crisp, carrying the scent of burning leaves and apple cider from the neighbors' backyard gatherings. 3 weeks had passed since that fateful voice message, and I'd become a master of deception in my own right. Every interaction with Sarah was a carefully choreographed dance, each stumble and moment of confusion, calculated for maximum effect. Mom, you put the milk in the pantry again. Sarah announced that Thursday morning, holding up the carton she'd supposedly discovered among my canned goods. I hadn't, of course. I'd watched from the hallway as she'd placed it there herself moments after arriving, but I gasped, putting my hand to my chest in dismay. Oh dear, did I really? I could have sworn I put it in the refrigerator. Sarah's eyes gleamed with triumph as she returned the milk to its proper place. It's okay, Mom. We all have senior moments. Senior moments. I was beginning to hate that phrase. Sarah had been dropping it into conversations like breadcrumbs, leading anyone who would listen down the trail to one conclusion: Lorena Morrison was losing her faculties. Actually, I've been having some trouble with my memory lately, I confided, lowering my voice as if sharing a shameful secret. Yesterday, I couldn't remember if I'd taken my blood pressure medication. Mom, that's serious, Sarah said, barely containing her excitement. Have you talked to Dr. Peterson about this? Oh, I don't want to bother him. It's probably nothing. But Sarah was already pulling out her phone. I'm calling his office right now. We need to get you evaluated. While she stepped into the living room to make the call, I used my own phone to record our conversation. Patricia had taught me how to use a simple app, and I'd been documenting everything. The beauty of being perceived as technologically inept was that no one suspected I could do more than make basic calls. After Sarah left, I called Patricia with an update. She's escalating, Patricia observed. The doctor's appointment is probably to establish a paper trail of cognitive decline. Be very careful how you handle that. Already ahead of you, I replied. I've been seeing Dr. Peterson for 30 years. Had lunch with him and his wife just last month. He's well aware of what's happening. Indeed, Dr. Peterson had been horrified when I'd explained the situation. He'd promised to document that I was of sound mind and body, and to be alert for any attempts to manipulate my medical records. But Sarah wasn't relying solely on medical professionals. She'd begun a campaign of social sabotage that would have been impressive if it weren't so cruel. That Sunday at church, Meredith Cooper pulled me aside after service. Lorena, dear, I just wanted you to know that if you ever need someone to talk to about difficulties at home, I'm here for you. Difficulties? I asked, genuinely puzzled. Meredith glanced around nervously. Sarah mentioned at the women's Bible study that you've been having some challenges, getting confused, forgetting things. She's so worried about you. How thoughtful of her to share that with everyone, I said dryly, but Meredith missed the sarcasm entirely. This scene repeated itself throughout the week. The clerk at the grocery store handled my change with exaggerated care, speaking slowly as if I might not understand. The librarian offered to help me find large print books without my asking. Even my neighbor, Bob Hutchins, came over to check if I knew how to use my lawnmower safely. But the worst betrayal came from an unexpected source, my granddaughter's school. I'd been picking Emily up every Wednesday for years, our special tradition of ice cream and homework help. So when the school secretary called to inform me that I was no longer on the approved pickup list, I felt as if I'd been punched. There must be some mistake, I said, gripping the phone tightly. I'm sorry, Mrs. Morrison, but Sarah was very specific. She said there have been some concerns about safety. You understand. I understood perfectly. Sarah was systematically cutting me off from everyone I loved, painting me as a danger to my own granddaughter. The cruelty of it took my breath away. That evening, I sat in my kitchen reviewing the notes I'd been keeping. Patricia had taught me to document everything, dates, times, exact words spoken. The picture that emerged was of a coordinated campaign to destroy my credibility and autonomy. My phone rang, Sarah's nightly check-in. Hi, Mom. How was your day? Oh, it was interesting, I said, allowing a tremor to enter my voice. The school called about some confusion with Emily's pickup authorization. I'm sure it's just a mix-up. Actually, Mom, that was me, Sarah said smoothly. I've been worried about your driving lately. Remember last week when you couldn't find your car in the parking lot? That had been another of her fabrications, but I played along. Did that happen? I don't quite recall. See, that's what concerns me. Maybe it's time to think about giving up driving, for your own safety and Emily's. But how would I get around? I asked plaintively. Well, that's another thing we need to discuss. Mark and I have been looking at some wonderful senior communities, places where you wouldn't need to worry about driving or maintaining this big house. You'd have friends' activities, medical care right on site. I don't know, dear. This is my home. I know it's hard, Mom, but we have to think about what's best for you. Actually, I've scheduled a tour at Prairie View for next Tuesday, just to look no pressure. My blood ran cold, but I kept my voice steady. If you think it's best, sweetheart. After we hung up, I walked through my house, touching familiar objects. The kitchen table where Frank and I had shared 42 years of meals. The mantel where our family photos told the story of a life well lived. The garden window where my African violets bloomed in purple profusion. They wanted to take all of this away from me. Not just the house, but the memories, the independence, the dignity of choosing my own path. And they were doing it with smiles and false concern, poisoning every relationship I had. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed I was already beaten, already lost in the fog they were trying to create. They didn't realize that every lie they told, every manipulation they attempted, only sharpened my resolve. I picked up the business card Catherine Walsh had given me. Tomorrow we'd finalize the trust documents. Sarah thought she was playing a long game, but she was about to discover that her mother had been playing a longer one. That night, I found myself in Frank's study, sitting in his old leather chair. I'd avoided this room since his death, unable to bear the lingering scent of his pipe tobacco and aftershave. But tonight, I needed his presence. "I don't know if I can do this, Frank," I whispered to the empty room. "She's our daughter. How do I destroy our own daughter?" The answer came not in words, but in a memory. Frank teaching Sarah to ride a bicycle, running alongside her, his hand hovering near, but not touching. "Sometimes," he'd said, "the most loving thing you can do is let someone face the consequences of their choices." He'd been talking about letting her fall and skin her knee, but the principle remained the same. Sarah had chosen this path, and now she would have to face where it led. I noticed the real estate papers then tucked not so subtly on the corner of the desk, where I couldn't miss them. Prairie View Senior Living brochures, forms with yellow sticky notes marking where to sign. Sarah must have placed them during her visit. I picked up the application form. Sarah had already filled in most of it. My name, birth date, social security number. Under reason for admission, she'd written, "Progressive cognitive decline family, unable to provide adequate care." The admission fee was staggering $200,000, non-refundable. Then $8,000 a month for a studio efficiency that looked more like a hospital room than a home. At the bottom, in small print, "Resident agrees to grant facility full power of attorney for medical and financial decisions." I photographed every page with my phone, adding them to my growing collection of evidence. Then I noticed something else. A sticky note in Sarah's handwriting had fallen behind the desk. I retrieved it and my heart stopped. "James, Mom signed papers. Schedule assessment for 10/31. Need commitment papers ready in case she resists. M's contact at PV will expedite admission." October 31st, Halloween. How appropriate that my daughter planned to make me disappear on the day when monsters walk the earth. I replaced the papers exactly as I'd found them, the sticky note back where it had fallen. Let them think I hadn't seen. Let them believe their plan was working perfectly. But as I climbed the stairs to bed, my phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Urgent development. Can you meet tomorrow morning?" Sleep eluded me that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering what new betrayal awaited. But one thing I knew for certain, October 31st would indeed be a day of unmasking, just not the way Sarah planned. The meeting with Patricia the next morning revealed the final piece of the puzzle. She slid a document across her desk, and I recognized it immediately, a life insurance policy. But not just any policy. "They took this out on you 18 months ago, Patricia explained. $1 million with Sarah and Mark as sole beneficiaries. The monthly premiums are being paid from an account in Mark's mother's name." I stared at the papers, my hands trembling. "They're not just planning to steal from me. They're betting on your death," Patricia finished grimly. "Mrs. Morrison, I've seen a lot in my career, but this level of calculated malice from a daughter to her mother, I'm so sorry." Sorry. Such a small word for such an enormous betrayal. But I didn't have time for sorrow. Halloween was only days away and I had preparations to make. "Thank you, Patricia. Please add this to the evidence file. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a senior community to visit." The tour of Prairie View was scheduled for 10 in the morning. I dressed carefully, my favorite lavender cardigan, the one that made me look particularly grandmotherly, in sensible shoes. I even added a touch of lipstick, applied slightly crooked a detail I knew Sarah would notice and file away as evidence of my decline. Sarah arrived early, bouncing with barely contained energy. "You look nice, Mom. I'm so glad you're keeping an open mind about this." "Well, you know best, dear," I said, allowing a note of uncertainty to creep into my voice. "I just want to do what's right." The drive took 30 minutes, during which Sarah painted a glowing picture of my future at Prairie View. They have bingo every Tuesday, crafts on Thursday, and the dining room serves 3 meals a day. You won't have to worry about cooking anymore. "But I enjoy cooking," I protested mildly. "I know, but it's getting dangerous, isn't it? Remember when you left the stove on?" Another fabrication, but I nodded as if recalling the non-existent incident. Oh yes, that was frightening. Prairie View squatted on the outskirts of town like a brick toad, all institutional angles and tiny windows. The smell hit me as soon as we entered disinfectant, failing to mask something more unpleasant. Despair, perhaps, or resignation. The tour guide, a brittle woman named Sharon with an aggressively cheerful demeanor, showed us through the facilities. The studio efficiency was even worse than the photos had suggested. A single room with a tiny bathroom, no kitchen, industrial carpeting, and a window facing the parking lot. "Isn't it cozy?" Sharon chirped. "And look, the bed has safety rails." "Just like a crib," I murmured, but neither woman caught the bitter irony. The common areas were marginally better filled with elderly residents who stared vacantly at a blaring television. In the corner, a woman clutched a baby doll rocking back and forth. Another man repeatedly asked everyone who passed when his son was coming to visit. "The staff here is specially trained in memory care," Sharon explained, leading us past a locked door marked Memory Unit. From behind it came the sound of someone crying. "What's in there?" I asked. "Oh, that's for our residents who need extra attention," Sharon said quickly. "But let's look at the dining room." Throughout the tour, I played my part perfectly. I asked confused questions, repeated myself, and even pretended to get lost on the way back from the bathroom. Sarah and Sharon exchanged meaningful looks over my head. "So what do you think, Mom?" Sarah asked as we sat in Sharon's office to discuss next steps. "It seems very nice," I said hesitantly, "but it's such a big change. Could I think about it?" "Of course," Sharon said, shooting Sarah a look that clearly said otherwise. "But I should mention we have very limited availability. This opportunity might not be here if you wait too long." "And Mom," Sarah added, "the house needs so much work. The furnace, the roof. It would be such a relief not to worry about all that." I nodded slowly, letting them see me weakening. "I suppose you're right. It is getting to be too much." Sarah practically glowed. "So you'll consider it?" "I'll do whatever you think is best, sweetheart." On the drive home, Sarah chattered about how smoothly the transition would go. "We can have an estate sale for most of your things. I know someone who handles that. And don't worry about the paperwork. James will take care of everything." "That's very kind," I said, staring out the window. "Will Emily be able to visit me there?" "Of course, when we have time. You know how busy she is with school and activities." But I knew better. Once they had me locked away and had control of my assets, the visits would dwindle to nothing. I'd become another forgotten soul clutching memories while waiting for family who never came. That evening, I met with Catherine Walsh at her office. She'd stayed late specifically for me, and the documents were ready. "This trust is ironclad," she assured me. "Your house, investments, bank accounts, everything is protected. Sarah has no access, and any attempt to challenge your mental competency will trigger an immediate investigation." And Emily. "The education trust is separate and untouchable. It will pay for her schooling directly with your sister Margaret as trustee. Sarah can't touch a penny." We spent 2 hours going through everything. I signed document after document, each signature, a small act of war against my own daughter. Catherine had also prepared a medical power of attorney naming Margaret instead of Sarah, and a detailed letter to be opened in case of my sudden incapacitation or death. I've seen too many cases like this, Catherine said quietly as I prepared to leave. You're doing the right thing, Lorena. Protecting yourself isn't betrayal, it's survival. The next morning brought a new development. Sarah arrived unannounced, accompanied by Mark and a man I didn't recognize. "Mom, this is Dr. Brennan," Sarah said smoothly. "He's a specialist in geriatric assessment. I thought it would be good to get a professional evaluation just to establish a baseline." Dr. Brennan, a thin man with cold eyes and a practiced smile, was already pulling forms from his briefcase. "Mrs. Morrison, this is just a routine cognitive exam. Nothing to worry about." "I don't recall agreeing to this," I said firmly. "Mom, please." Sarah's voice took on a wheedling tone. "It's for your own good. If something happened and we didn't have proper documentation, then I suppose I should call my doctor," I said, reaching for my phone. "Dr. Peterson would want to be involved in any medical evaluation." "That's not necessary," Dr. Brennan said quickly. "Too quickly. This is just preliminary." "Nevertheless, I insist." I dialed Dr. Peterson's emergency number. "Hello, Dr. Peterson." "Yes, there's a Dr. Brennan here wanting to conduct some kind of evaluation." "You don't know any Dr. Brennan? How interesting." The man was already packing up his briefcase. "Clearly there's been a misunderstanding. I'll be in touch to reschedule." He left quickly, Mark following after shooting me a venomous look. Sarah remained, her face a mask of frustrated fury. "Why did you do that, Mom? We're trying to help you." "Are you?" I asked quietly, because it seems to me that bringing a stranger to my home without my consent to conduct an evaluation I didn't request isn't particularly helpful. For a moment, the mask slipped. I saw the calculating coldness in my daughter's eyes, the same look she'd had in that voice message. Then it was gone, replaced by hurt innocence. "I can't believe you'd think that of me. I'm your daughter." "Yes," I agreed sadly. "You are." She left in a huff, but not before I heard her on the phone in the driveway. "James, we have a problem. She's not cooperating. No, we need to accelerate the timeline." Halloween was 3 days away. The final confrontation was coming, and I was ready. That night, I packaged copies of all the evidence bank statements, photographs, recordings, the life insurance policy. One set went to Catherine, another to Margaret, and a third to a safety deposit box at a bank Sarah didn't know about. Standing in my garden as the sun set, I thought about the Japanese maple we'd planted for Sarah's homecoming. It had grown tall and strong, but somewhere along the way, disease had crept in. Sometimes to save the tree, you had to cut away the rot. "I'm sorry, Frank," I whispered to the darkening sky. "I'm so sorry it's come to this." But Frank would have understood. He'd always been the practical one, the one who saw things clearly. And what I saw clearly now was that my daughter was no longer the child we'd raised. She'd become something else, something dangerous. The chess pieces were all in position. Sarah thought she was moving me toward checkmate, but she'd failed to notice that the powerless pawn had reached the other side of the board. And everyone knows what happens when a pawn reaches the 8th rank, it becomes a queen. October 31st arrived with an unseasonably warm morning, as if nature itself was holding its breath for what was to come. I'd spent the previous evening making final preparations, including one very important phone call to Margaret in Boston. "Lorena, this is insane," my younger sister had said after I'd explained everything. "Sarah, our Sarah." I know it's hard to believe. I didn't want to believe it either, but the evidence is overwhelming. "I'm flying in tonight. You shouldn't face this alone." "No," I'd said firmly. "I need you to stay there. If something goes wrong, I need someone outside of this mess to protect Emily. Promise me, Margaret." She'd promised reluctantly. Now, as I dressed for what would either be my finest hour or my greatest heartbreak, I found myself surprisingly calm. The die was cast, as Frank used to say when he'd made a difficult decision. Sarah arrived at 9 earlier than expected. She had Emily with her, which caught me off guard. My granddaughter ran to me, wrapping her arms around my waist. "Grandma, Mom said we're having a special lunch today." I looked over Emily's head at Sarah, who smiled with calculated innocence. I thought it would be nice for Emily to spend time with you. You know, in case you decide to make any big changes soon. The threat was subtle, but clear. Play along or lose access to your granddaughter entirely. How wonderful, I said, hugging Emily tighter. Where are we going? The Wellington room, Sarah announced. Mark's already there with some family members. It's a surprise celebration. The Wellington room was Naperville's most upscale restaurant, the kind of place Frank and I had saved for anniversaries. Whatever Sarah had planned, she wanted witnesses, respectable ones. During the drive, Emily chattered about school while Sarah kept shooting me meaningful glances in the rearview mirror. I noticed we weren't heading directly to the restaurant. Just a quick stop, Sarah said, pulling into the parking lot of James's law office. Uncle James has something for you to sign, estate planning stuff. You mentioned wanting to update things, remember? Did I asked vaguely. Last week, Mom. You were quite insistent. Sarah's tone was patient, as if dealing with a confused child. Emily, sweetheart, wait in the car. We'll just be a minute. I want to come too, Emily protested. No, honey. Grown-up stuff is boring. Play your game and we'll be right back. The office was eerily quiet for a Friday morning. James was waiting in the conference room, documents already spread on the table. Mark sat beside him, trying and failing to hide his smirk. Aunt Lorena, James said, warmly rising to kiss my cheek. His aftershave was expensive and cloying. So good to see you. This won't take long. I allowed myself to be guided to a chair, noticing how they positioned themselves around me. Trapped, they thought. A confused old woman surrounded by family who knew best. Now, James began sliding papers toward me. These are just some updates to your existing documents. Nothing major. I picked up the first page, making a show of squinting at the text. I can't quite make this out. The print is so small. That's why we're here to help, Mark said, his voice dripping false concern. Basically, it gives Sarah medical and financial power of attorney, just in case. In case of what? I asked. Well, Sarah jumped in. You've been having some difficulties lately. This just ensures that if anything happens, we can take care of you properly. I flipped through the pages, slowly recognizing the documents for what they were: a complete surrender of my autonomy, power of attorney, property transfer authorizations, even admission papers for Prairie View, all waiting for my signature. This seems like a lot, I said hesitantly. Mom, please. Sarah reached for my hand. We've all noticed the changes, the confusion, the memory lapses. Even Emily's noticed you're not yourself lately. Using my granddaughter as emotional blackmail, the cruelty of it made my chest tight, but I maintained my facade. I suppose if you think it's best, I said, picking up the pen James offered. They all leaned forward slightly, vultures waiting for the kill. I could see Sarah mentally spending my money, Mark calculating property values, James planning his fee. I signed the first document with a shaky hand, then the second. They relaxed marginally. By the third signature, Sarah was practically glowing. Just a few more, Mom, she encouraged. You're doing great. I signed every document they put in front of me, each signature careful and deliberate. When I finished, James quickly gathered the papers, sliding them into a folder. Excellent. This is all for your protection, Aunt Lorena. I'm sure it is, I said mildly. Now shouldn't we get to lunch? Emily's waiting. They exchanged triumphant glances as we walked back to the car. If they'd been paying attention, they might have noticed that my confusion had vanished. My step was steadier, and I was no longer playing with my hearing aid. But they were too drunk on their victory to notice. The Wellington room was packed with familiar faces. Sarah had indeed assembled an audience: Mark's parents, several cousins, friends from their church, even Sarah's old college roommate. The private dining room had been decorated with flowers and balloons reading, "Happy Retirement." "Surprise!" everyone shouted as we entered. I played my part, looking confused but pleased. Oh my, what's all this? "We're celebrating your next chapter, Mom," Sarah announced to the room. Mom's decided to simplify her life, maybe do some traveling, enjoy her golden years, without all the hassle of home ownership. Ah, so that was the story. Not that they were forcing me into a nursing home, but that I was choosing a carefree retirement. Sarah had thought of everything, creating a narrative that would explain my disappearance from my home and community. We sat down to lunch, Emily beside me, Sarah strategically placing herself between me and the exit. The conversation flowed around me, everyone discussing my exciting plans, as if I weren't there. "Where will you travel first, Mrs. Morrison?" Mark's mother asked. "Oh, I haven't quite decided," I said, then added with perfect timing, "Sarah, where was that place you mentioned? The one with all the nice people?" A few guests shot Sarah questioning looks, but she covered smoothly. "There are so many options, Mom. We'll figure it out together." The meal progressed with forced cheerfulness. I noticed Dr. Brennan had joined the party, sitting where he could observe me. Another witness to my supposed decline. Sarah had indeed thought of everything. Or so she believed. As dessert was served, Sarah stood raising her champagne glass. "I'd like to make a toast to my wonderful mother who has given so much to all of us. As she enters this new phase of life, we want her to know how loved and cared for she'll always be." The room erupted in applause. Several people wiped away tears. It was beautifully done, a masterpiece of manipulation. I stood slowly, my own glass in hand. The room quieted. "Thank you all for coming." I began, my voice clear and strong. Sarah's smile flickered slightly. "It's wonderful to be surrounded by family and friends for such an important announcement." I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. "But before we continue, I have something I'd like to share. A voice message my daughter sent me recently. Accidentally, of course." Sarah's face drained of color. "Mom, I don't think—" "Oh, but I insist." I pressed play, turning the volume to maximum. Sarah's voice filled the room. "Mom's getting so pathetic. She actually believes we're saving for Emily's college when we're booking that Europe cruise. The old fool keeps sending money every month. Just keep playing along until we can get her to sell the house and move into that cheap senior home. Then we'll have everything." The silence that followed was deafening. Forks frozen halfway to mouths, champagne bubbles, the only movement in the room. That's not," Sarah stammered. "But wait," I said pleasantly, "there's more." I played Mark's follow-up message about the house value and power of attorney. Then Sarah's voice again discussing how her mother was too stupid to realize what was happening. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," James said, standing quickly. "Oh, I don't think so," I replied. "But just to be clear, let's talk about those documents I signed this morning." I pulled out my own folder. You see, when someone has cataract surgery, as I did 3 years ago, reading small print isn't a problem. I read every word, and I signed every document with my maiden name, Lorena Harper, which hasn't been my legal signature for 48 years. The blood drained from James's face as he realized the implications. Invalid signatures meant invalid documents. Furthermore, I continued, my actual attorney, Catherine Walsh, has already been notified about this attempted fraud, as has Adult Protective Services. Oh, and Patricia Reeves, the private investigator I hired, has been documenting everything for the past month. Grandma. Emily's small voice broke through. "What's happening?" I knelt beside her chair. Sometimes sweetheart people make very bad choices, even people we love, but the truth is always better than lies. "You can't prove anything," Mark blustered, but his bravado was crumbling. "Actually, I can." I turned to address the room. Mark and his brother James have been running an elder fraud scheme through Prairie View Senior Living. They've already done this to Mark's Aunt Gloria, who died mysteriously after signing over her assets. I have documents, photographs, and recordings proving everything. The room erupted. Mark's parents recoiled from their son. Guests pulled out phones, either recording the drama or calling others. Dr. Brennan tried to slip out but found Catherine Walsh blocking his path, accompanied by 2 police officers. "That's him," I said, pointing to Brennan. "He's been posing as a doctor to provide false competency evaluations." As Brennan was led away in handcuffs, Sarah grabbed my arm. "Mom, please, I'm your daughter. I made a mistake. We can work this out." I looked at her, really looked at her. searched for the little girl who used to dance in rain puddles and beg for one more bedtime story. But all I saw was a stranger wearing my daughter's face. You planned to lock me away and steal everything your father and I worked for. You used my granddaughter as a weapon. You tried to convince everyone I was losing my mind. That's not a mistake, Sarah. That's a betrayal so deep I don't have words for it. The police were approaching now, having finished with Brennan. I'd given Catherine permission to share our evidence with them that morning. Mrs. Morrison, the lead officer said gently, we'll need you to come to the station to give a full statement. Of course, I said, then turned back to Sarah. Oh, one more thing. That life insurance policy you took out on me. The one worth $1 million. The insurance company has been notified about the fraudulent application. I believe insurance fraud is a federal crime, isn't it? As the reality of her situation sank in, Sarah began to cry. But they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of rage, of plans thwarted and schemes exposed. This isn't over, she hissed. I'll fight this. You're clearly not mentally stable. Everyone here saw how confused you've been. Actually, one of the guests spoke up. It was Dr. Peterson's wife, whom Sarah hadn't recognized. I've been recording since the voice message played. Your mother seems perfectly lucid to me. Others nodded, phones still out. Sarah's carefully orchestrated performance had become her own trial with dozens of witnesses to her confession. As Mark was handcuffed shouting about lawyers and lawsuits, I felt a small hand slip into mine. Emily looked up at me with Frank's eyes, confused and frightened, but trusting. Will you still be my grandma? She whispered. Always, I promised, squeezing her hand. No matter what happens, I will always be your grandma. The private dining room emptied slowly, guests departing with shocked whispers and pitying glances. I stood in the ruins of what should have been a family celebration, holding my granddaughter's hand, and felt peace. The truth was out. The trap had been sprung. And while my heart was broken, my dignity remained intact. The weeks following the confrontation at the Wellington Room unfolded like dominoes falling in perfect sequence. Each revelation brought new shocks, and the carefully constructed facade of my daughter's life crumbled piece by piece. The investigation moved swiftly. Detective Andrea Marsh, a woman with kind eyes and an iron will, became my regular contact. She'd specialized in elder fraud for 15 years, but even she was appalled by the scope of what Sarah and Mark had attempted. In my experience, she told me during one of our meetings, family members who commit elder fraud usually start small, a few hundred here, 1,000 there. Your daughter and son-in-law went straight for everything. The evidence I'd gathered with Patricia's help proved invaluable, but it was Emily's innocent revelation that had broken the case wide open. During a supervised visit at the police station, she'd mentioned to the child advocate that Mommy and Daddy have a special book where they write down all the old people's names and cross them out when they're done. That special book turned out to be a detailed ledger of their targets, complete with financial assessments and timelines. Mark's Aunt Gloria was there, crossed out in red ink. My name was near the bottom, not yet crossed out. There were 6 others. The media latched onto the story with fierce determination. Local teacher exposes daughter's elder fraud ring made headlines across Illinois. My phone rang constantly with interview requests, all of which I declined. This wasn't about fame or revenge. It was about justice. Catherine Walsh proved to be worth her weight in gold. Not only had she protected my assets, but she'd also connected me with a family law attorney to address custody of Emily. Sarah and Mark, facing multiple felony charges, had their parental rights temporarily suspended while Child Protective Services investigated. The house in Wheaton told its own story. When police executed the search warrant, they found a storage unit key that led to a trove of items stolen from elderly victims. Jewelry, artwork, family heirlooms, all carefully cataloged and waiting to be sold. They also found the BMW 3 other luxury vehicles and bank statements showing offshore accounts. But it was Mark's brother James who provided the most damning evidence. Faced with disbarment and decades in prison, he flipped immediately, revealing the entire operation. Prairie View Senior Living wasn't just complicit. It was the hub of a network spanning 3 states. Residents were systematically over-medicated, isolated from family and stripped of assets. Those who resisted or had family who asked specially damaging. James had detailed records of every forged document, every fraudulent transfer, every family destroyed by their greed. The nursing home shut down within a month. Families descended to retrieve confused, over-medicated relatives who'd been warehoused and forgotten. The stories that emerged were heartbreaking. A retired professor who'd been told his children had abandoned him while they were frantically searching for him. A widow whose house was sold while she was sedated in the memory unit. A veteran whose medals and pension had vanished into administrators' pockets. I attended every court hearing, sitting in the front row where Sarah couldn't avoid seeing me. She'd aged years in weeks, her carefully maintained appearance crumbling along with her schemes. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by jail uniforms and desperation. "How's Emily?" she asked during one recess, her voice small and broken. "Thriving," I said honestly. "She's in therapy, living with me and doing well in school. Her teacher says she's shown remarkable resilience." "Does she ask about me?" "Every day." I wouldn't lie to her even now. I tell her that you made bad choices and have to face the consequences, but that doesn't mean you don't love her. Sarah's lawyer, a public defender, overwhelmed by the case's complexity, tried plea bargaining. But with 6 elderly victims, 3 of whom had died under suspicious circumstances at Prairie View and federal insurance fraud charges, the prosecutors weren't feeling generous. Mark cracked first. During a particularly intense interrogation, he revealed that Sarah had been the mastermind all along. The voice message hadn't been accidental. He'd sent it deliberately after a fight about targeting me too aggressively. He'd wanted to slow down. Sarah had wanted to accelerate. In his twisted way, he'd tried to warn me. This revelation shouldn't have hurt as much as it did. I'd already accepted my daughter's betrayal. But learning that she'd been the driving force, not the influenced partner, cut deep. Every memory of her childhood now came with a shadow. When had my bright, loving girl become capable of such calculated cruelty? The answer came from an unexpected source. Sarah's college roommate, Jennifer, reached out after seeing the news coverage. She'd noticed troubling behavior even then: Sarah's obsession with wealth, her contempt for her middle-class background, her jokes about marrying rich or finding other ways to trade up. She used to say that being poor was a choice, Jennifer told me over coffee. That smart people figured out how to get what they deserved. I thought it was just ambition, but looking back, the trial date was set for spring. In the meantime, I focused on healing, both Emily's and mine. We established routines: breakfast together every morning, homework at the kitchen table, bedtime stories in the rocking chair Frank had built. Slowly, carefully, we built a new normal. My sister Margaret visited frequently, providing the stable family presence Emily desperately needed. We didn't try to erase Sarah from Emily's life. The photos remained on display, the memories acknowledged. But we also didn't pretend that loving someone meant accepting abuse. "Why did Mommy try to hurt you, Grandma?" Emily asked one evening as I tucked her in. I'd prepared for this question with her therapist's help. Sometimes people get so focused on wanting things, money, fancy cars, big houses, that they forget what really matters. They make choices that hurt the people who love them most. Will she get better? I hope so, sweetheart. But that's something only she can decide. The community support overwhelmed me. My former students, now adults with children of their own, rallied around us. The church created a meal train. Parents from Emily's school offered play dates and support. For every family member we'd lost to Sarah's schemes, we gained 10 friends who showed us what real love looked like. Even unexpected allies emerged. Mark's parents, devastated by their son's crimes, reached out to apologize and offer help. They established a victim restitution fund, liquidating their own assets to repay what their son had stolen. It wouldn't bring back the dead or undo the trauma, but it showed integrity in the face of shame. Winter arrived with a preliminary hearing that revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. 17 elderly victims across 3 states, millions in stolen assets, 3 suspicious deaths. The federal prosecutor announced they were seeking life sentences for the primary conspirators. Sarah's lawyer requested a meeting. Would I consider speaking on her behalf at sentencing? Ask for leniency. She was my daughter, after all. Surely I could forgive her. I thought long and hard about that request, prayed over it, discussed it with Margaret, with Catherine, with Dr. Peterson. In the end, the answer was no. Forgiveness and consequences weren't mutually exclusive. I could work toward forgiving Sarah while still believing she needed to face justice for her crimes. The holidays approached with bittersweet anticipation. Emily and I decorated the tree together, baked cookies for neighbors, and created new traditions. On Christmas morning, she found a letter from Santa explaining that while her parents couldn't be there, she was surrounded by people who loved her. "Grandma," she said, curled against me as snow fell outside. "I'm sad but also happy. Is that weird?" "Not at all," I assured her. "We can feel lots of things at once. Sad about what we've lost, happy about what we still have." As the year ended, I received word that Gloria's son wanted to meet. He'd flown in from California needing to understand how his mother had died alone and penniless, despite his attempts to help her. We met at a quiet restaurant, 2 children betrayed by those they'd trusted most. She kept telling me she was fine. He said, tears in his eyes, that Mark was taking wonderful care of her. I should have pushed harder, visited more. "They were very good at manipulation," I reminded him gently. "Don't blame yourself for trusting family." We parted with a strange bond, survivors of the same storm working to rebuild after devastation. He promised to testify at the trial to speak for his mother, who could no longer speak for herself. As New Year's Eve arrived, I stood in my garden despite the cold looking at Sarah's tree. The Japanese maple was dormant now, its branches bare against the winter sky. But come spring, it would bud again. Life would continue changed but not destroyed. Emily found me there, bundled in her new coat and mittens. "Grandma, it's almost midnight." "So it is," I agreed, taking her hand. "Should we make a wish for the new year?" "I wish—" She started, then paused. "I wish for good things, for you and me, and even for Mommy and Daddy. Good things can still happen, right?" "Right," I said, squeezing her hand. "Good things can definitely still happen." As fireworks lit the sky, I thought about justice and mercy, love and boundaries, the price of trust and the cost of betrayal. The reckoning wasn't over. There would be trials and testimony, verdicts and sentences, but we'd survived the worst of it. And in surviving, we'd discovered something precious, our own strength and the power of truth to set us free. 1 year later, I stood in the same garden watching Emily help me plant spring bulbs. The Japanese maple had indeed budded again, its leaves unfurling in defiant beauty. Life as I'd promised her had continued. The trial had concluded 6 months earlier. Sarah received 25 years in federal prison with the possibility of parole in 15. Mark got 30 years. James was disbarred and sentenced to 20. The Prairie View administrators faced their own trials with the facility's assets liquidated to compensate victims. The day of Sarah's sentencing remained etched in my memory. She'd stood before the judge, finally showing genuine emotion as she read a letter of remorse. Whether it was authentic or another performance, I couldn't say. But when she looked at me across the courtroom and mouthed, "I'm sorry," I chose to believe she meant it. I didn't speak at her sentencing, but I did write her a letter afterward. "Sarah, I love you. I will always love you. That love is why your betrayal cut so deep and why I couldn't enable it by pleading for leniency. You need to understand that actions have consequences, that the pain you caused was real and lasting. But I also want you to know that redemption is possible, not through manipulation or schemes, but through genuine change. I hope you use these years to find the person you were meant to be before greed consumed you." Emily is safe, loved, and thriving. When you're ready, truly ready, to be the mother she deserves, that door isn't closed forever, but it will take time, work, and proof that you've changed. I pray for you every night, not for early release or easy forgiveness, but for genuine transformation. You were once my greatest joy. Perhaps someday you can be again. Mom. She wrote back once a short note saying she was attending therapy and working in the prison library. I kept the letter, but didn't respond. Some distances need time to cross. Emily had bloomed under stability and love. Her grades improved, her confidence grew, and the shadows in her eyes gradually faded. She joined the school choir, made friends, and even laughed again. Real, genuine laughter that reminded me of Sarah at that age. "Grandma," she said one evening as I helped with homework, "Mrs. Chen says I should write about a hero for my essay. Can I write about you?" "I'm no hero, sweetheart. I just did what needed to be done." "But you stood up to bad people even when they were family. You protected me and yourself and all those other grandmas and grandpas. That sounds like a hero to me." Her essay won first place in the school competition. She read it aloud at assembly, and I sat in the audience trying not to cry as my granddaughter described courage in terms I'd never applied to myself. The financial aftermath had been complex but manageable. The trust Catherine established protected my assets completely. Insurance fraud charges meant the $1 million policy on my life was void with premiums returned and penalties paid to the state. The Victim Restitution Fund, supplemented by seized assets from the conspirators, helped restore some of what was stolen from others. I sold the house in Naperville not because Sarah had wanted me to, but because it was time. The memories were both precious and painful, and Emily and I needed a fresh start. We found a smaller place in the same school district with a yard big enough for gardening and a spare room for when Margaret visited. My new volunteer work at the senior center became a passion. I led workshops on financial elder abuse, teaching red flags and protective strategies. The stories I heard broke my heart. Children, grandchildren, caregivers, and strangers, all preying on vulnerable elders. But for each story of betrayal, there were more of families who learned to protect themselves because of our warnings. "You saved my mother," one woman told me after a workshop. "She was about to sign over her house to my brother who's been pressuring her just like you described. Because of your presentation, she called a lawyer instead." These moments made the pain worthwhile. My story, our tragedy, became a cautionary tale that protected others. I also started a support group for grandparents raising grandchildren due to their own children's crimes or addictions. We met weekly in the church basement sharing struggles and victories. Emily sometimes helped with childcare for the younger kids, showing a maturity beyond her years. Dr. Peterson, who'd been so instrumental in protecting me from false medical evaluations, became a closer friend. He and his wife often joined us for Sunday dinners, providing Emily with stable adult figures, beyond just me and Margaret. When he retired, he joined our elder abuse prevention efforts, lending medical expertise to our warnings. The blog I'd started about our experience grew into something bigger than I'd imagined. Thousands of readers shared their own stories, sought advice, and found comfort in knowing they weren't alone. Publishers approached me about a book deal, but I wasn't ready yet. Maybe someday when the wounds had healed more. Emily's relationship with her parents evolved slowly. She wrote letters to both, which I mailed without reading. Their responses came through the prison mail system, carefully screened. On her 10th birthday, she asked to visit Sarah. After long discussions with her therapist, we arranged a supervised visit. I waited in the car while Margaret took Emily inside. Those 2 hours felt like years, but Emily emerged dry-eyed and thoughtful. "She looks different," was all she said at first. Later at bedtime, she added, "She said she was sorry for everything. I told her I loved her, but I was still mad. Is that okay?" "That's perfectly okay," I assured her. "Love doesn't mean you have to forget the hurt." As spring turned to summer, life settled into new rhythms. Emily attended camp while I expanded the elder protection program. We took a vacation to the mountains, just the two of us, creating new memories, untainted by betrayal. She learned to fish. I learned to let go of hypervigilance, and we both learned that joy could coexist with loss. The anniversary of the Wellington Room confrontation passed quietly. I marked it not with anger, but with gratitude for Patricia's investigation, Catherine's legal protection, Dr. Peterson's integrity, and most of all, for that accidentally sent voice message that had saved me from a terrible fate. Standing in my new garden, watching Emily water the tomatoes we'd planted together, I reflected on the journey. The pain hadn't disappeared. It had transformed into wisdom. The betrayal hadn't broken me. It had revealed strength I didn't know I possessed. And the loss of the daughter I thought I had made room for the granddaughter who needed me to be whole. Grandma. Emily called. "The butterflies are back. The ones you said would come to the butterfly bushes." I joined her watching the monarchs dance among the purple blooms. Transformation, I thought. From caterpillar to chrysalis to butterfly. Sometimes we have to dissolve completely before we can rebuild as something new. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Saw the news. Another elder fraud ring busted in Michigan. They cited your case as inspiration for the investigation. You're making a difference, sis." I was making a difference. We were making a difference. Every workshop taught, every story shared, every family protected, added up to something bigger than our individual pain. As we headed inside for lunch, Emily slipped her hand into mine. "Grandma, I'm glad you're my hero." "And I'm glad you're mine," I replied, meaning every word. The woman who'd folded laundry that October afternoon, trembling at her daughter's cruel words, felt like a stranger now. That Lorena had been trusting to the point of blindness, giving to the point of depletion. This Lorena understood that boundaries weren't walls, but foundations, that love required wisdom as well as generosity, and that protecting yourself allowed you to protect others. The greatest lesson I'd learned: when someone shows you who they are, believe them, but also believe in your own ability to survive the truth, seek justice, and rebuild something beautiful from the ruins. In my study, I kept a photo from Emily's essay presentation. She stood at the podium, confident and bright, while I sat in the audience, beaming with pride. Next to it sat an older photo, Sarah, at the same age, equally confident, equally bright. 2 daughters, 2 paths. One grandmother who'd learned to love them both while protecting herself from one. Was this a happy ending? Not in the fairy tale sense. Sarah remained in prison. Mark's family was shattered. Victims had died and trust had been irreparably broken. But happiness isn't the absence of pain. It's the choice to build something meaningful despite it. Every morning I woke up in my own bed in my own home, making my own choices. Every afternoon, Emily burst through the door with stories of school and friends. Every evening, we created new memories to overlay the painful ones. And every night, I said 2 prayers. One for the granddaughter sleeping down the hall, and one for the daughter sleeping in a cell. Both prayers asked for the same thing: redemption. For Sarah, redemption meant accepting responsibility and genuinely changing. For Emily, it meant growing up without letting her parents' crimes define her. For me, it meant using our story to protect others and finding peace in purpose. Love doesn't mean blindness. The greatest gift we can give our children isn't endless sacrifice, but showing them that we value ourselves enough to demand respect. I learned that protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is hold people accountable for their actions. This truth had set me free. Free from manipulation, free from false guilt, free from the belief that family bonds excused any betrayal, but also free to love honestly, help wisely, and trust carefully. Free to be the grandmother Emily needed and the advocate other elders deserved. As I finished writing in my journal that evening, Emily appeared in the doorway. "Grandma, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you think people can really change, like completely change?" I considered my words carefully. "I think people can change if they truly want to and work very hard at it. but they have to change for themselves, not just to avoid consequences or make others happy. Real change comes from inside. I hope Mom changes, she said quietly, for real, not pretend. So do I, sweetheart, so do I. As she headed to bed, I added one final entry to my journal. Year 1 after the storm. We survived, we're healing, we're helping others avoid our fate. Sarah is facing justice. Emily is thriving, and I've discovered that 70 years old isn't too late to become who you were meant to be. Frank would be proud. I'm proud. The story continues, but this chapter, the chapter of victimhood, is closed. The next chapter belongs to survival, strength, and service. And maybe redemption for us all. I closed the journal and prepared for bed, at peace with the past and ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. Outside, the spring evening hummed with life renewed. Inside, a grandmother and granddaughter had built something beautiful from betrayal's ashes. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. If you've made it this far in my story, I have a question for you. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who were taking advantage of your love and trust? How did you find the strength to protect yourself while still caring for them? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you or might help someone you know, please consider giving it a like and sharing it with others. Subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and redemption, because sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the hardest experiences. Thank you for listening to my journey. Remember, your kindness is a gift, not an invitation for exploitation. Guard your heart, but never let it harden. Trust wisely, love deeply, and always, always value yourself enough to demand the respect you deserve. May you find the courage to face hard truths and the wisdom to build something better from them. With love and hope, Lorena.